welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me on tonight's episode is Liam James Ward, the co-founder and CEO of Something Something. The London-based global agency works with artists, labels, and cultural brands to bring stories and in-person moments online. Trusted by stars like The Clash, Billie Eilish, 30 Seconds to Mars, Delkin McKenna, and Disclosure, Something Something's understanding of Gen Z and utilizing fan accounts to supercharge strategies keeps their creativity high while remaining reactive in real time. The company also is a creative strategy partner for the likes of Meta, TikTok, Google, Live Nation, and Soho House. So Liam, welcome to 3Q. It's great to have you on. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me. I mean, we were just mentioning that I obviously got into LA yesterday, so very glad to have some blue skies and sunny weather, which you wouldn't normally be getting in England. And yeah, just off the back of South by as well, so feeling full of ideas, full of inspiration, ready to conquer the world. How are you doing, Rachel?
I'm doing pretty well myself. Thanks for asking, but I'm excited to hear your answers to these questions. So, are you ready for the first one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Imagine for a second you are sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note, and what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
Okay. When I turned 25 would have been 2 months before me and my co-founders started something something. So like that's actually a really weird time. And something I don't actually talk about too much is I left my old job working at another agency and I actually left to go and work at another company. And after about 2 weeks at that company, things didn't work out, long story short. And that job kind of falling apart is what led me down the path to starting something something. So I have no idea that in the next 2 months I'm about to go on that journey at 25. So I guess on a personal note, I'd say it's going to be okay. Don't worry, because you can imagine like when everything kind of fell apart a little bit, I was like, damn, okay, do I go back to my old job with my tail between my legs, hoping they'll take me back? Do I frantically apply for jobs at labels or something and see what I can get and figure it out later? Or do we go and start something new? And, we took the risk of doing the latter. But there was, again, not something I talk about super often, is there was a period of maybe a couple of weeks where I was just sat on the sofa staring at the wall, being like, what the fuck am I going to do? So I think just reminding myself it's going to be okay. And actually, all the people I know now who are great founders or great, people who've made real impact in the industry actually have all had a story not too dissimilar. So I think at that period, I'm about to go on a journey that really sucked for a bit. So I'd remind myself that it's going to be okay. The professional piece of advice almost becomes folded into that. It's just like follow your gut. I think that I'm sure everyone says that sort of thing all the time on this sort of podcast, but for me, I don't mind saying, I didn't study business at university. Like I've never really had like a particularly academic background. I was never a big entrepreneur. So again, I wasn't that guy who grew up thinking, oh, I'm going to go on Shark Tank one day, or I'm going to go on The Apprentice one day. I like was more than happy working for other people. So to accidentally fall into a place of starting my own thing for a while, it's probably only more recently that I've felt comfortable being like, quote unquote CEO. Like I always shied away from that title because I think it sounded too serious. So I think following my gut and just making the decisions that feel right to me are more than enough. You don't have to have a crazy education to be good at this sort of thing. So yeah, to summarize, follow your gut and everything's going to be okay. So pretty broad pieces of advice, I'd say.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. I'm sure that that must have been so scary, especially being 25 and you're about to jump into this whole world of being an entrepreneur and starting your own company. What kind of led you to even having the idea of what something something could be, and how did you kind of pull the trigger on executing that?
I'd worked at labels before that. I'd worked at other agencies. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we all know that social media just kind of broke with TikTok and post COVID and everything. Like the way that people were consuming online fundamentally changed. And I think both within working in a company as well as seeing all my friends around me and so onwards, it felt like a lot of pressure was being put on artists and also a lot of pressure being put on marketing managers at labels to figure this stuff out with no real support. So it just felt like there was a gap. And me and Laura, my co-founder, we spoke to everyone we knew, like artists, labels, managers, and we were simply just like, what's pissing you off, you know? And there were a lot of themes, and we started to piece together like where the overlaps were between massive multi-million pound major label artists alongside people barely selling 100 tickets or people working at the platforms or people working at other agencies. We could see this overlap, and we're like, cool, well, that's the problem. How do we go and fix that? And to quickly summarize, it was first and foremost bringing content creation and channel management together, not two separate teams. Second thing being staying on top of how things are constantly moving and changing and trending. Like that comes from having a young team, but also a team of people who are really in it and living and breathing it. I mean, I actually was just with time zones and everything, I was just checking in with my guys, and they were all on stage at the O2 last night, 20,000 capacity venue with one of our bands dancing around in wombat costume. So they really do get stuck in. And, shout out those guys. But then third and foremost, it felt as though a lot of other people in our space were very focused on followers and views and likes, and they're all great metrics, sure, but they're a means to an end. The metric for success really has to be, are we driving more music consumption, more ticket sales, more merch, more storytelling, so onwards. Without that, how is what we're doing actually making an impact? So with all that kind of those gaps appearing, we just went, let's go do that. And a bunch of kids with iPhones back then, still just maybe a few more kids with iPhones now, just trying to do what we think's right.
That's really cool. All right, next question. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we all know that's no different in the music industry. Sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they could be quite good. So, what's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
Oh, okay. I mean, how dirty to go? It's definitely my attitude to try and spin this into a bit of a positive. I think a secret that I learned very quickly is that overnight successes don't really exist. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a few that maybe come out of the woodwork every now and again. I'm sure everyone's talking about when you point at that, you can point at Charlie XCX, you can point at Chapel Roan, these artists who've been slogging away for ages and then suddenly it breaks. And those are the super mega stars who've been doing it for a while, right? But even on like a lower level, I mean, I've seen artists who even let's say on TikTok have like got shed loads of followers, like, hit like 1 million followers or whatever. And it's just like they've got this massive audience now and they've gone to selling out venues and whatever it may be. But actually, like, whether they were friends or whether it's even people we worked with, I've seen the slog of just like posting stuff and it not working or it not, try seeing some post about, oh, you have to do this now on social media and then following that and it not working for you. And eventually people find their individuality and that is always what starts connecting. So like, I guess I'm not really saying like a secret other than just like, don't believe this idea of like an overnight success. Like I've seen artists who have been called overnight successes, and I've seen that same artist sleeping on sofas while recording their music for years before that. And then they suddenly have a hit and they're an overnight success, quote unquote, right? So I just don't think, I don't like that term. I've never liked that term. And I think, yeah, get the secret is that doesn't really exist so much, or it's, even rarer than you may think.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. I feel like it also sets the wrong expectations for artists coming up, and then maybe they have a lot of followers, but it's not connecting when they post, and then it's like, why isn't this working? You just gotta be yourself. That's how you connect.
Absolutely. And I think, artists like Charlie and Chapel, like they're now in a position where their albums, a couple albums, Charlie, a few albums, Chapel, what, 2 albums, I think, into their career, people are now discovering them and they've got this whole world to step backwards into. I actually would go as far as to say an overnight success can be quite bad because, and I've seen it firsthand. You have an artist whose debut single or, one of the early tracks that they release catches fire, and then people get bored because they just once that song campaign is like over and done, there's nothing more for them to dig into yet, and you're almost like climbing up a hill to try and still keep their attention. Whereas if you've got this wealth of catalog and this wealth of story and lore for people to go back into, that maybe gives them a bit more to stick around for. So if anything, an overnight success can actually be more detrimental than it sounds as shiny as it sounds, you know?
Totally. Yeah, I agree. Okay, final question. Throughout your career, I'm sure you've been asked plenty of questions, whether it was for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, there has to be one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question and what would be your answer?
Ooh, okay. So I'm like setting up my own interview here. I love that. I think it makes me think of, the classic thing when you're in a job interview and they're like, what's your biggest weakness? And you're like, I'm just too organized, or I'm too creative. You know what I
Yeah, I'm
mean?
just
Like,
too perfect. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like what could I spin that into to make me sound really great? But I think, you could go down, there's a few routes for this, isn't there? I think I could go down a route of like, saying like, oh, what's really the intention behind this, and talk all about how the industry is so focused on doing things just because they can, like they're not focused on what the intention behind it is. That's like one way I'm going. But I actually, for some reason, and just because of some things that are going on with friends of mine at the moment in our industry, my answer, what question would I like to be asked more is how are you really doing? Which like not trying to like spin this into something too sickly, but it's just like, you know, I remember there was a campaign a couple of years ago in the UK where it was like when you ask someone like, "Oh, how you doing?" and they're like, "Yeah, I'm good. How you doing? What's going on?" You kind of like question them a little bit more, not like hard, but just like, how are you really doing? Are you like for real? Like, because everyone automatically goes, yeah, I'm good. Everything's great. Killing it. Yeah. Instagram stories. I'm like on a private jet. I'm doing this and doing that. But like, I do feel like even if it's 10% of people, when you actually ask them, like, how are you really doing? They actually open up. And then maybe even 10% of that 10% actually have something they really need to talk about. It's just about, we're not drones. We are people. Ultimately, we're fans as well, So I've always thought if you're crazy enough to go and do a job in music and basically do the exact same job you could do in any other industry and get paid half as much, you got to be a little bit crazy, right? You got to really love music a lot for that to be the thing you do. So we're probably all a little bit messy underneath the surface. So I think that, as much as from a networking mentality and so on was like, yes, connecting with people has purpose or whatever, but we're all real people at the end of the day. We all go home. We've all got families that maybe have got something going on. We've all got friends that, are going through something. We've all got, we're all paying too much rent or whatever it may be. We've all got struggles. So it's like maybe don't chase that email for the third time at like 5 p.m. on a Friday. Maybe just think this is a real human being on the other end of that. So yeah, again, not trying to get too sickly on you here, but I just think that it's got a lot better in the however many years that I've been working in this world, but it's still got a long way to go to just like bringing a human element back in, right?
Mhm.
And especially, to go almost full circle to me being talking about my job not working out, and that's what started me on the path to do something. Right now, redundancies and everything going on, the industry is changing. So let's ask each other how we're really doing. Let's give space for a bit more emotion, and let's give space within ourselves to, you know, allow for other people to be human, I don't know. Wow, I feel like I'm like stood on a soapbox with my fist in the air at this point, but thanks for giving me
No,
the space to say that.
of course. I think that's so, so important. So before we close it out, how are you doing?
No, no, thanks. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'd be wrong not to be honest. I'm in the middle of a weird scenario where I'm in the US for work-based reasons. I actually my my landlord is selling my flat in about 2 weeks back in London, so I'm frantically trying to find a new place back in London while doing it remotely. That's a bit, tough, but I've got amazing people around me. I'm in an awesome place obviously in LA, like work's going great. We're doing some great creative work right now. As I said, really proud of the team and everything they've been putting out at the moment. So I think as much as you can get caught up in like that big dark gray cloud that's over you, I think getting the opportunity to talk about these sorts of things does make you go, you know what, everything's doing pretty damn well. But how are you really doing, Rachel?
I am doing pretty well. Can't complain. The podcast is doing great. The job is
Oh yeah.
great. So we're feeling good over here.
Awesome. Awesome. What a positive note.
Well, it's about time we close out tonight's episode. But Liam, thanks again for joining me. It's been wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
To everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Stay tuned for next week of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. See you next time.